anxiety, and I didn't remember that you had coded.
The biggest and best brands in the future, especially in the digital age, won't view user generated content as a liability or a risk. What your metrics are and the behavior that you incentivize, you need to be really careful about what that is. I was able to partner with Aloe Blacc. He recorded a song called Clapping, and he wanted to license my, I think in a matter of years, going to be very difficult to distinguish between what's real and what's not.
As everything becomes digital, ownership becomes more important. I would love to know how you envision the future and how Web3 plays into that, because you have kids as well. Like, what do you envision for the future they grow up in?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm excited about digital ownership, partly because I think the alternative is the world gets increasingly digital and we unfortunately rent everything, right? Or other people, like platforms own and have the, major decisions on whether you're allowed on those platforms, and then you are permitted to exist on them. And so I think we've seen some of these issues in Web 2 and some of the consolidation of power. And so I see decentralization as a way to bring power back to people in the digital realm. And kind of looking ahead at the future, like I think I see a future that's in the metaverse. And that's like, a sci-fi term that's been around for a few years. But to me, that's like immersive digital worlds with interoperability and social layer, and hopefully with an ownership layer. And so maybe as a father, I was just playing Fortnite with my kids, and to them that's the metaverse, right? It's like they have their friends from school in there, friends who moved away. They care about owning skins and emotes like that, and they don't actually they don't actually own them, right? But they'll there's an economy. They have they're thinking about their V-Bucks and how to use them, and there's achievements, and then there's a game that they play. And so like I think Fortnite, honestly, like on as far as like the Web 2 metaverse is doing a fantastic job. They've got great IP partnerships. Disney just locked in to build a Fortnite. They have the what is it? Yeah, like UEFN, or the Fortnite creator, custom islands and everything. And so I think that's like an exciting piece to it. When I read or kind of watched Ready Player One, I think for a lot of people that's like a really romantic view of the metaverse, but I view it as a dystopia, because like you have this like kind of monopolistic corporation that's about to be overtaken or at risk of being overtaken by a bad actor. You have indentured service, like from the people who get in debt and they have to kind of go work in the metaverse. You have like you die and you lose your items, and like the economy is really unfair, and so it's a cautionary tale. And a lot of the early kind of metaverse science fiction was dystopian because I think there's a lot of risk.
I think you covered a lot of very important topics that we actually want to talk with you about.
All right.
And I think what we can do is start digging into each of them and start unpacking it. I think I will start with something that is the closest to us in terms of like the nearest future, like the socials one that you mentioned. Specifically from the Web3 space, we kind of can see how it emerges with Farcaster and their recent kind of like success feature frames. Like lots of people who were maybe like a little bit fading the platform now coming back and trying to experiment with it. So, and I know that you are also there and you were early on the platform. So how do you see it kind of like plays out? I don't mean exactly Farcaster, but just generally, like decentralized social media or like the ownable social graphs. How it's going to play out, and what are these important components that are going to play the role? You, from your perspective as the person who kind of like works on the community building side.
One of the hardest things is Web 2 emerged with a really, really strong, we talk about duopolistic or monopolistic behavior, like Web 2 in a lot of ways is hard to crack, right? Like I think one of the most difficult things with social is you really need that network effect. And so, someone would start a decentralized social network today, they'd kind of be like, hey, come use it. And you would be like, well, there's no one there, right? So um, nobody wants to go there until you have critical mass, and you don't get critical mass until you get critical mass. So one thing that DWR did that was really fascinating to me is he reached out to me kind of in the early days of Farcaster, and he's like, hey, I'm onboarding individual users
Yeah.
and would love to set up a call with you and introduce Farcaster to you and set you up with your account. So it was like kind of invite only, and he was basically reaching out to people he thought would be, understand the vision for the network, the protocol, and come and use it. And so hopped on a one-on-one call with the founder, and he like showed it to me, got me my username, helped me set up my wallet and everything, and that was it reminds me of like when Airbnb started, like the founders were like taking photos of apartments and renting their stuff, because like you have to what do they say? It's like do things that don't scale and until you can't, right? And so I'm sure at this point things are growing fast enough that he's not doing one-on-one calls with every single user. But I think that was a really important part, is like, how do you go from no one's here to people are here, you have to invite. And the reality is like, I jumped in and like, saw some people that I knew and respected and engaged with them. Frames is a really interesting piece to Farcaster and Warpcast right now, just because it's so extensible, like what people are doing and how people are like thinking about. You have social content, but then you also have like experiences and ownability and interactivity that you want to add to it. And so, it was like someone was doing like a lottery on Frames, and then Coinbase did like a mint a penny that was like really interesting, and so there's plenty of people experimenting with that. So I do think like the strength of your protocol is going to be really governed by the number of builders you have on it. And then maybe one layer up from that is like the number of creators you have on top, right? And so as we get interesting content, interesting people, and interesting experiences and apps, there's certainly a lot of risk when it comes to kind of Web3 social. It is hard to take on the giants, and so we'll kind of see what happens there. Even like I think was it Twitter that spun off Blue Sky, kind of before selling to Elon,
Yeah.
and that I think hasn't taken off. Something I've been encouraged by is when Facebook launched Threads, they kind of voiced a commitment to some decentralization of,
Yeah.
I think it was like the usernames or something, like, or the data. I don't know that, there's no Facebook DAO coming anytime soon, but I think at the same time, we want interoperability. I'm not married to the tech. I'm interested. Maybe this is because I'm more on the branding side. Like I'm interested in like what is good for the user and what's good for society.
I think that, well, you're right about this competition between Web3 and Web2 platforms are quite hard. And maybe like my humble point of view is the Web3 app that is going to kind of make it and become like this killer app is probably not going to be the interpretation of the old versions of something, but introduce something new that kind of completely feels different, but utilizes the same behavior that people have, right? Sharing or taking photos and sharing it. It's not entirely something new that people are doing. We used to do this all the time, or sending messages to each other. I think that what you also kind of started talking about Dan Romero and the way he was onboarding it, which I actually personally right now going through the same approach from the team IYK that you know. They're also
Yeah.
kind of doing it one-on-one calls. They're sending some free samples to assemble and stuff for the early access, which I found very exciting. I think that kind of shows the importance of building the community, the right community from the early on. which Farcasta also did a good job of. There is other platforms like Web3, different type of social media ones that are not so popular in the space, and they're kind of utilizing the tokenization and stuff, but it feels a bit more speculative. While the team from Farcasta, they were a bit more creative and kind of targeting different types of the audiences till they find the one that kind of stick the best. During the last years, like there was a lot of different, I would say, ways how communities were built. You know, in the early days, it was a bit more easier. Maybe, you know, it's a bit more also speculative. But as time goes on, and we went into the bear market and all the things, how would you describe your experience of and the change that happened? And what is this change that happened in building the communities? So if projects, companies, creators are now building it, what they're going to focus on, and maybe as a second question, do you have the predictions how it's going to evolve or where it's going to go?
Yeah, would love to have some predictions. Let me think about this. But you know, I came to Web3 as a collector, at least on the NFT side. I mean, obviously, a lot of us come to crypto as kind of, you know, investors. Someone says like, you know, get this and you can make money. Um, but I've been a collector of things, you know, physically, whether it's sneakers or streetwear, toys or cards and things like that. This concept of like digital membership and digital identity also started to splinter off and be something that I was really curious about. And so, you know, there was a week where I was talking about, you know, the kind of ad hoc membership that CryptoPunks became, and so I was thinking about that and wondering like, what's the possibility for token gated membership? That was actually the week that Bored Ape Yacht Club came out, and so I think one of the challenges that we see over the last couple years with the market shift is like, how do you differentiate between, say, community vibes and the feeling you get when the price goes up, right? Like, because you can have a community and you're like, oh, this community is great because, you know, I bought in at, you know,
Yeah.
0.08 and now it's 2 or 3 ETH or something. Like, you know, that feels good. Is that a community? Not necessarily. I think what I'm excited about is bounded communities. And so that's something I talk about as like inclusive exclusivity. How do you kind of draw a circle? And you know, in Web3, you do that with, you know, token gating or like, you know, with a particular asset. And I think one of the challenges is when you have an NFT community or even like a fungible token community, your floor price is really the price that someone is willing to leave your community for, right? Now, obviously, people have multiple, so they might just sell, but they're like, you know, you have a very public valuation of that membership and that experience, and the art and utility, whatever's tied to it, and even, you know, what does it mean for a community member to kind of have in your mind, back of your mind, oh, I'm enjoying being part of this club, but every day I could sell it for this much, right? And, you know, at some point it's like a house or a car or an education.
It's really interesting what you were saying about like differentiating the feeling between the feeling of like belonging to the community versus having this
Yeah.
high when the floor price goes up. And there's an interesting example actually because I'm quite active in the Farcaster community in Paris. So I'm really kind of seeing what's going on. I witnessed all these new frames being built, and there was actually one drop like 2 nights ago, and it was sold out within or minted out within just a few minutes. The floor price shot up to I think zero point 0.7 ETH, and now we had a lot of these like OG Farcasters who were early to this mint change their PFPs, and it's really interesting because people are holding on to this NFT, and I saw that even in the past with Farcaster early users that there were some collections being dropped that were just owned by these OGs. And in this case, comparing, let's say, Clubhouse in the early beginnings of Clubhouse to the launch of Farcaster as really having proof that you were early. So something that allows you to say, I was here and I can prove it, and I have something that other people don't. And it might have a visual representation. So I'm wondering, in your opinion, what creates this feeling of community?
Yeah, that's such a profound question. I mean, I think at its base, I think community is so much about human relationship and connection. Now, obviously, like, it's a $1 billion question on kind of how you get people to connect, especially in this world where you have like you live in a city and be so lonely, so many apps and so many venues, but still really struggle to connect. Reddit is a great example of community building. What Reddit enabled was micro communities to gather, no matter the size, and then converse and create content around the particular topic that they're excited about. And so, chances are, if there's like some tiny interest that you have, if you go on Reddit, you can find 20, 50, 100, a million people that are like also care about that thing and are memeing and providing tips and connecting about that. When you look at, say, like the health of a blockchain, you look at like the number of nodes and how diverse they are, how decentralized they are. And I view community the same way, which is like people, like every person that joins a community puts themselves in, and that's one more node that makes that community stronger. In Web3, we just have a challenge, which is how do we reach kind of community level consensus in the same way that like a blockchain has to decide what what's written in a block. That's a whole complex process. Human relationships are even more complex in some ways.
That was an interesting point you made about how the diversity of people makes the community richer. And I really see that in different types of networks, like not only looking at Farcaster, the number one example right now, but you kind of join as this group of early users and you feel like you have something in common. You've all witnessed the start of something new. Same with Bored Ape Yacht Club for you.
Sure.
Then you see that everyone is kind of bringing their own experiences into the community and their own interests.
And also support to each other when it comes to
Yeah.
like the one thing is when you support the project that you all love, but then there is a next level layer where people within each other, which actually makes the community, right? It's not like somebody tells you to do what to do, but when people internally start to create things and just support each other. And I think, yeah, like Bored Ape is a really great example from all the projects that came out of it. And
Ape support ape. Follow.
yeah, and how
Yeah.
much support people get being inside the community. For me, the problem and the question that I see, like, the entry point into the community most of the time we see is like, the drop of the collection and then the financialization of the opportunity. That people might be initially very much about the community, but then it's kind of hard. You were kind of talking about how the prices go up and it might be life-changing thing. So my question is like, what are the ways that we can explore something that kind of creates this shared incentives for everyone involved, but it's not that much tied to the fact that you have only one PFP. So like how this economy might evolve, and when I think about it, I always think about the games, how it happens there. People inside of it when they join it and play it, they do have this shared environment where they have the culture, where they have some kind of like a norms, and then there is a economic layer is a different layer where it's not that much contradicts to being part of the community. You just like have the skins that you can sell, and then this is your way how you can participate in the economy. It's a different question that you don't actually own the skins and you just have some digital representation of them and you can lose them really easy. So beginning of the conversation when you were talking about the metaverse and things and how do you see it in the future for your kids, like I'm trying to explore the ways how without the full immersion this kind of vision that we have can start emerge a bit earlier in the different forms. And I wonder if you have any ideas or like some thoughts how it might happen through different forms of the platform, or actually maybe just the mechanics and not the new type of platform?
Growing Web3 communities, there's always a balance between, how do you deploy your incentives? What are you incentivizing, right?
Yeah.
And then when you're dealing with kind of limited assets, like what's your supply and demand? Are you going to dilute? Will you expand? Or when you think of a boundaried community, are you permanently fixed at a certain size? And I think the game example is really great because like you have like how do you reward your OGs? But then how do you grow, right? And get new people?
Yeah.
And then when do you do your token, and who gets how much, the community versus saving more for growth and incentives later. Not everybody gets it right? Sometimes you like give too much away, or you don't keep enough. Sometimes you give it too early. Sometimes you don't give enough and you lose your community. So there's so many different ways to go wrong, and so many, and a few ways to go right. If you're listening to your community and you're adaptable, I think it goes a long way, because it's rare that anybody has it all figured out, right? You can't just kind of like set everything in motion and it just works perfectly. Sometimes, the people you think you're going to reach aren't the people that you reach, and you reach a different group of people, and they're your community now. And what does it mean to engage with them? And sometimes I think one of the challenges we had with like the speculative run up during the bull was often you were trying to create a community, but you were actually getting middlemen or women who were saying, I'm not here to be part of the community. I'm here to sell it to the person who wants it later at a higher price. And that's, so that speculative activity is actually extractive to your community. And honestly, there's lots of times I think, even in the bull, where people join a community for speculative reasons, or, we'll see what happens. And they stuck around, right? Like you kind of come for the money and stay for the community, or, yeah. And art's the same way, right? There's plenty of people who buy a piece of art because they're planning to sell it, and then they realize they have a connection with it. Maybe that's a connection that's social, like with others, or maybe it's a private individual experience. And then all of a sudden you're like, shoot, I don't know if I want to sell it. And now what do I do? And then it goes up or down, and you're like, conflicted.
Do you think it's even possible to really align creator and brand incentives with their community incentives? So is it possible to align these two incentives?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's possible to closely align brands and communities. It takes a generosity on the brand side that is pretty rare. The Web 2 way was like, I can build all this, but if I keep it to myself, right, like I get all the value, and like Web 3 way is like, if we share it, we build more value together, but I have to give something up, right? Let's use an obvious example, which is the decision to airdrop a token, right? And you're saying, let's say it's a governance token or something. You're saying prior to the creation of that governance, you make 100% of the decisions, right? You have full control over the thing that you're building. And when you airdrop tokens to whoever you decide to airdrop, and hopefully they're good standing community members, you're sharing your power with someone else. And do you share 20%, 50%, 100%? Like, how do you decide how to share that, right? And do you pre-mine it, or does the team get a share? What's the investor unlock? Like, who's going to dump on who? Those are all like questions that emerge when you decide to share that power. We saw this lesson come from like the Starknet tokenomics, which heavily rewarded developers who contributed to like GitHub. So now there's a bunch of farmers that are like leaving like random comments on GitHub. They're not technical, they're not developers, but they're like, shoot, if I do that and I make, 5-6 figures, like they'll just like spam a bunch of stuff. And maybe they'll learn to be developers, but like all of a sudden you have noise introduced to Signal. And of course, like the Starknet community of people who were using the network, but using it as farmers, they're frustrated because they feel like they're contributing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But the Star Foundation was kind of like, well, like the developers are contributing, the people who are just like swapping back and forth, not so much. So almost everything in Web3, if it's exploitable, someone's going to find it. It's like Mev, right? Where people are like, oh, great, you guys are transacting, I'll just get in the middle and take my share. But yeah, I mean, I think that we're stronger together in Web3 when we realize, like, hey, and like my example for this is like when Bored Ape Yacht Club and Yuga Labs like relinquished their IP rights for individual apes and bestowed those rights to the holders of the token, they shared their IP. Their brand was kind of like forever going to be some level of decentralized, right? Because holders can build with their IP alongside whatever Yuga decides and BAYC decides to do from kind of a centralized perspective. BAYC became much bigger and more successful and created more value and was a bigger brand because of that decentralization. And if they had held on to all the rights themselves, like it just wouldn't have become what it is because you had artists and entrepreneurs joining and building, all these different projects and businesses. Now we have like Made by Apes. So I think over like, what is it, 600 plus licenses for apes that are building.
It's a great example of how, well, first of all, it kind of gives the opportunities for the community members. It's just kind of like Yuga gets bigger, all the IP holders, whatever they're creating, also have more opportunities. And then their products are basically user-generated content in some way for the brand itself. And I think one of my favorite examples of how user-generated content help to even maybe some way direct the storyline is a 10K tier, which is also now part of Yoga Labs. I really love how it encouraged, it's kind of like some speculation side, but a very creative speculation side, how it encouraged people to create kind of like a project around talking and discussing like what it all means, where it goes, and what is the storyline of it is. And it also reminded me, like doing research, I digged deeper into your Twitter and I saw your tweets about the Baby Yoda. So I wanted to ask you, like, if you were bringing Baby Yoda into the Web3 decentralized world, like, what would be your strategy? Like, how would you play it out? What would it be?
That's fun. Yeah, I mean, Baby Yoda was just such a fun moment in the show where you basically took like an iconic character and then like kind of reimagine them as like a baby and then kind of hand that over to the internet. And so like you remember like the Baby Yoda song, and you could still sing it, and now there's like socks and shirts and all that stuff. And so like Disney is just an absolute masterclass at merchandising IP, right? Like they just collect like some of our favorite IPs, build them, but also acquire them.
Yeah. It's a network.
And then they have...
It's like one feeds into the other. Like you cook up this amazing character, you create movies, shows, etc., and then products, and it all feeds into one another.
Yeah, the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, 100%. And ultimately, it's like, how do you become kind of like a lasting cultural icon, right? How do you contribute to part of culture where people see that character and they remember it? So, I mean, I agree. I love UGC, and I think that's like a holy grail for modern brands, just because they realize, like, look, you brand could create the content, you can make the shows and the tell the stories, but it is so much more powerful when you put that opportunity in the hands of millions of people and just let them run with it. So I think that something that has been really fascinating in the kind of emergence of the internet and internet culture is fan fiction, right? Where fan fiction is just like user generated stories. And to be honest, like, let me think, like some of the biggest IPs today actually started as fan fiction.
50 Shades of Grey is kind of like a fanfic of a Twilight.
Right.
And then Spider-Verse, like there's different versions, there's a different names. I forget, I think Malcolm, one of the characters, is basically created one of the fans of the Spider-Man, and then now they're bringing it to their actual animation. Like the whole animation is going to be like one of the verse. This is at least the ones that come to my mind as an examples of it.
Yeah, so I think that the biggest and best brands in the future, especially in the digital age, won't view generated content as like a liability or a risk.
Yeah.
Um, they'll view it as an opportunity, and so what I would love to see from Disney is like, what would it be like to say, take Baby Yoda and protect your IP? Obviously, like, you know, you've got to kind of enforce the counterfeit shirts or, like, you know, whatever, brand safety, but at the same time, like, how could you in a safe way as Disney think about taking this character and sharing it with the community to empower them to contribute to the stories, the imagery, the memes, and and the world. And so, and then to reward those people for their contributions, right? And so that might be, maybe you do a call for stories and you do a voting and you let people share, and then all of a sudden, like, one of those things becomes an episode of Mandalorian, or like, that would be incredible. And you'd get a bunch of crazy ideas, and you know, we've seen, like, the internet, when you let them vote on stuff, you get like Bodie McBoatface or whatever, like, you get crazy trolly stupid stuff. um but I think, like, a brand's relationship with its fans, like, isn't adversarial. And I think so often, like, the legal department is, like, you know, geared up for war because they're just afraid of, like, violation, infringement, all that stuff. um but I think, like, the best brands are kind of courageous enough to say, like, hey, what it would it mean like to kind of, like, open our hands a bit, engage with our fans and our customers and our community in a way that is less about, you know, I have all the power and you get what I say and you give me the money for that. And so less transactional and less kind of like fear based,
Yeah.
and more kind of hopeful and collaborative. So, you know, like, look, if someone handed me the IP, would I, like, go and try something really experimental with that? Like, it'd be fun. But again, a company of Disney's size and experience, like, it's hard, you know. And I advise a company that has a license to
Cryptos.
the Yoda character, so Cryptoys, yeah. And so they're working with Disney and doing some really fun stuff. And yes, like, you know, community approvals for content are, like, um, you know, take a little bit extra time, because you can't just have ambassadors just posting whatever they want. Um, and at the same time, like, I'm encouraged by Disney's willingness to kind of put that IP in the hands of a partner and ultimately a community in Web3. Um, and I look forward to kind of seeing, as, you know, hopefully, as those, you know, toes in the water, those experiments for a brand like Disney pay off, and you see, like, wow, um, we got way more engagement and actually better, you know, consumer activity when we open our hands a bit. Like, hopefully we see a shift toward progressive decentralization.
We recently wrote a deep dive on like digital characters, we call them virtual personas, and how they in the future will be able to interact with their audiences in entirely new ways. And
Yeah.
one of those characters is developed by a Web3 studio. And she has all these different ways that she's interacting with her audience. Like she is asking them for help in specific life situations. So she really is coming to life like a real person. I wonder, in terms of touch points and what this opens up for fan interactions, what would you like to see, or what do you expect to happen in the future?
Yeah, it's going to be really fascinating. I think when you look at virtual personas, like, we have AI be such an interesting piece to that. I just made a virtual persona that reads my Twitter account, and then you can talk to, basically, like, you know, some kind of, like, simulacra of me, that is, like, you know, the at this point, you know, whatever, 14 years of 14, 15 years of tweeting that I've done, and all my different interests, right? And so I asked my AI, like, what's your favorite an NFT or something, and then they started going off on, like, art and aesthetics or whatever. And I was like, oh shoot, um,
That's good.
that's crazy, right? And we could see, you could create historical characters based on, you know, their body of work. it's going to be, I think, very quickly, I think in a matter of years, going to be very difficult to distinguish between what's real and what's not.
Yeah.
And that's, like, it's scary, right? Like, you have the uncanny valley, and what happens when you get like, what's on the other side of the uncanny valley, right? Is like simulation, um, like, deep fakes and all that stuff. Like, I'm certainly excited for like the mutability of virtual characters, right? And what you can do to say like collaborate. Maybe a good example for me is like Bado, the AI artist, where a whole community of holders of Bado's token have been training the artist together, this AI artist, by voting on its outputs and hopefully giving it a human plus AI collaborative perspective. It's a fun experiment, and I think we're starting to see stepping back from that hand holding to allow Botto to actually make some of its own decisions, or to appear to make its own decisions. I don't really know how that works, but that to me is like a fun experiment in community, AI, creativity. And there was a whole controversy recently. Like, one of the Genesis Botto pieces sold for, some absurd price, and everyone looked at it and thought that it was like ugly or absurd.
I think it's actually an amazing experiment of even like how the models of how art is created is designed, and how the participants are getting rewarded as well. And I think, well, it's inevitable that things are going to be mended with AI or improved by AI, and it's already happening. Like for years, it's just like became so widespread
Obvious.
among, yeah, like just a general user. But in the
Yeah.
healthcare and the tech, potentially, like in our phones, there are so many different applications that we're already working, utilizing and basically being trained on this data. But I really love the idea of how people participated, and potentially, I don't know about this project, but I assume then the income that they had, it was distributed among all the token holders, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah, so Botto is a DAO, and so the DAO can vote kind of, partly what it happens to the revenue, but some of the economics were Botto's super rare sales. A portion of the funds from those sales would be used to buy and burn the token. And then you also, if you vote, there's like protocol revenue, which is like, DAO will decide like what are the behaviors that contributed value to the project, and will reward some of the ETH either retroactively or proactively to participants. So that might be number of votes, the number of pieces you voted on, but the number of points you use to vote, what you get by staking the token. And so like it's a very complex system, that's designed to try and find a way to incentivize the community to participate in the development. It's a joyful experiment, right? And honestly, like, I when we talked about airdrops, like Botto to start, like one of the ways that they airdropped their token was CryptoPumps holders, Bored Ape holders, Art Blocks minters, Super Rare and Foundation minters, and so like they basically looked at who are the where are the communities of people that we think value art, value digital art, and the advancement of technology for culture, and how do we put some of the token in their hands in order to invite them to be part of this experiment. That's been, I think, something interesting to me. But I think we'll probably see that with like a VTuber or something, like a virtual virtual VTuber, which is redundant, but like in AI models and AI characters and community driven you know personas and IP and things like that. So we have to balance like, do you get a better output from like an auteur, like a single person who uses their experience and expertise and skill set to make something, versus like, what is it, governed by committee, right? And I think we've seen plenty of times when too many cooks in the kitchen have resulted in a inferior dish. But I also think like when like a decentralized organization is working properly, you can empower everybody's different skill sets and perspectives and experience to make something better than an individual.
It's
Uh,
it's kind of
yeah, it's going to be
interesting, like
interesting.
well, I think how you actually maybe who you're inviting it, like I think the voting again, like yeah, in the real world, in a physical world, like, it's also quite a problem. Like you do have the best model that could be designed, like when we are going and
Right.
voting, and the same can apply like to all the initiatives that we have in the NFT space. How we're trying to improve to make it more fair and actually bring in the project or DAO further. But you kind of like mentioned the airdrop in the specific collections, right? So they kind of handpicked some of the people that they already had in mind, and I think, well, it's also a way of choosing the specific target audiences or community members that you want to see, and hope that they will be the right ones. And I think that we already saw this approach even in other projects like Web2 projects addressing or companies addressing like specific communities inside the NFT space. Same thing, like targeting a specific project, but it always, well, because of the way that we have the technology maybe now, but you're kind of like addressing the whole community. But even before that, you were talking about like incentivizing people and then rewarding people. So is there is a way, or you do you have any ideas how is it, if it even makes sense to actually have this kind of data somehow stored on the chain or being represented on the chain? So when you're addressing people, you're not just broadly addressing the specific community that is relatively small now because it's, let's say, 10K, or if it's a bigger, let's say 100K, but it's still relatively small to what, I mean, when you're a big company or a brand, or you are aiming to become a big company, aim for. So is there like any ideas that you have, like how the incentives and the rewards that people are doing could play into the way how in the future people are building communities, or how it can influence who is actually allowed in?
Yeah, I mean definitely a huge opportunity. I think we're seeing a lot of builders try and tackle that from the perspective of like decentralized identities,
Yeah.
so DID, and then also like on-chain reputation. From a community perspective, like could you actually take a look at a set of data that would give you a better sense for who the good actors will be and the best contributors for your project? Like ultimately that's what, say, like a whitelist process is like when you're looking at like, and some of them are just like, oh, take people with the most followers. Like, is that a good result? Like, not necessarily. We saw this with, say, like the Dimension airdrop, where they airdropped to certain culture communities that they felt like would steward the protocol well. But again, there are limits, right? If someone's committed to one community, if you invite them to another, they're not necessarily going to have bandwidth to really join yours. And that's kind of where like the vampire attack happens, where you're like, let me steal the good community from someone else and incentivize them to come to mine. I think the broader question is like, how do we track and measure someone's participation and contributions in a way that is fair and ethical, but also like gives us future indicators for success? Whoever solves that's going to be super rich, because it's like going to help so many brands, find a really good way, and it can help you pluck out the bad apples and things. But we see this with something like recruiting, right? Where like companies are just trying to find like, what are the data points that help me to know what a good employee is. Google was like kind of one of the early leaders, and like they had these really specific, like, we found that this piece of data means you're going to be a good employee. And it was like honestly very exclusionary, because if you didn't go to the school and you didn't get the grades, you didn't
Yeah.
have the opportunity, like you would get kind of like locked out of the system. I think of that as like you get what you measure for. That means that what your metrics are and the behavior that you incentivize, you need to be really careful about what that is, because if A, if it's exploitable, or B, if it's like correlation and not causation, or if it's just like, not sufficiently granular, you run the risk of like people behaving for those incentives and not necessarily getting
Hmm.
what you want, your ultimate goal, right? And so like, example is like you could build a social campaign around impressions, followers, likes. But, if that's exploitable, whether it's like bots or, kind of inorganic engagement, views that don't actually convert, right? Like what's your call to action? What's your ultimate goal? If the metrics don't match that, your agency, your partner, your marketing team will just like go, hey, my KPI was to go get this many things. I went and did it. And then you actually realize what you have is hollow.
I'm wondering, because this is still something that has to be solved, there is no ideal solution out there yet. And looking at all these different data points that create this incentive structure that you can, as a community owner, apply to really facilitate organic interactions if that's what you want. What do you think are these data points? And also working with your clients in the past, maybe what problems did you run into, or where did you think, oh, I wish this incentive system would be in place?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we look at metrics for clients, and then ultimately like whether those are hooked to incentives, when they go out to the community, um, for me, it really starts with trying to understand like what we're trying to accomplish, how that contributes to your business and the long-term health, growth, and bottom line of your brand. Um, Once you have those kind of in a matrix, like then you can start to unpack like, oh, great. Well, we want to grow our audience so that we can then present offers to them and market our product to get more users to sell. Growing that audience, like there are certain platforms, like who is that audience? Who's that desired audience? What platforms are they on? Who's influential to them? What media do they consume? And how do we, what brands are they loyal to? How do we map that persona or personas and then find a way to reach them? You've got to be nimble too, right? Because the metrics that work for you in your early stage or at first, like whether they're gameable, or then you have to be prepared to pretty quickly adapt to find a new one.
It kind of goes back to the question of the predictions of where do you think this like the marketing side of the Web3 is going to go. Um, right now it feels like points and loyalty, well it's not loyalty, but points and airdrops, or the promise of the airdrops, and basically people are farming. And so what do you see the healthy future maybe?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what we're talking about, decentralized ID and reputation scores. Like, I'd love to see like the building up of kind of more robust visualization of good actors, real humans, contributors, community members in good standing, and then find ways to collaboratively invite them into, those incentives. If you share with that group of high signal quality people, um, you should be able to do more than your Web2 competitors. Right now, too many brands that are in Web3, like they want the benefits, but they don't want to truly commit to that.
Yeah.
And so they like do something, but they don't really fully do it. Or they do something, but they measure for the wrong thing, and they get what they measured for, but it's not what they wanted. And to me, it's like that's the story of marketing: is you go from high noise marketing to many to like targeted, personalized, effective, right? Like the more you can streamline that funnel, the more effective your marketing spend is, right? And it's like a car commercial or a medicine commercial, right? Like when I'm watching TV and like an ad comes on for like a specific medicine, I'm always like, what percentage of the people watching this like have that condition or know someone that condition? Like, how effective is this marketing? I don't know. Amazon used to know you were pregnant by the products you were searching, and they were mailing leaflets to people with like baby coupons, and they mailed it one time to like a teenage girl, and the father was like trying to sue them, and then he found out that she was pregnant.
Oh,
Like Amazon knew that she was pregnant before she was, or like one of the e-commerce sites, and I don't remember if it was Amazon. And it's like that's like terrifying. That's what we do with data. Like data ownership is very important. Privacy is very important. How do we build on-chain systems that can like, yes, optimize for the recommendations and the intelligence and personalization that come from, but do it in a way that's responsible.
if somebody is right now building a community and tries to do it like from the bottom up approach, like what would be your suggestion for them, how to create the funnel and the touch points with their potential community members?
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to get your hands dirty, like to just like get in there and like actually do the work of like, a lot of people get their first few users by like go to like the local meetup for blockchain or marketing, or sometimes you have to just kind of like go recruit people like manually, the same way that Dan Romero did for Farcaster. And then at some point, once you have that critical mass of community, then it's like, how do we activate them as a grassroots team, as a street team, as a fan club? How do we invite them into the shared success of the brand? And that might be with incentives. I mean, obviously, people have been doing it without tokens forever. So there's plenty of ways to do it without Web3. But I'd argue that when done right in Web3, it's just supercharged. Align the community to go out and recruit, create content, and evangelize on behalf of the brand, and then have those all funnel down to a core objective for your brand.
I think that's actually where the ownership comes in, right? When you have the part at least a feeling of this, you have a stake and this intrinsic motivation. If it's success, I also have a success. It's probably that's where it starts to show the real change compared to Web 2 and Web 3. Taylor Swift has maybe it's an extreme example of a very successful community building, but still I think there is a lot to learn from her, like how she interacts and builds this relationship with the community, how she basically incentivizes people and how they continue to support her, and she kind of brings examples of that nobody else is doing it, like invite into her house or give people to like extra super fans some to hear the music before the release and maybe have a feedback and so on. I think it's like a very interesting example that we kind of can see in the Web3 space, when there is the early users.
Yeah.
It kind of shows a great example of how incentives become aligned because of this connection between participants.
So if you could revive Maui Prime, what would you do with it if you could do anything?
In the height of kind of Bored Ape excitement, I was able to partner with a recording musician and release, some collaborative music with the IP,
Pretty cool.
and build kind of a...
Was it Aloe Blacc?
Yeah, it was Aloe Blacc. So he recorded a song called Clapping, and it was kind of a fun song, and he wanted to license my ape to be the character that's part of the song. Certainly things, that moment passed, and so someone asked me, is like, hey, is Maui Prime releasing any more music? And I think there's no plan right now, but if you would ask me, like, would I continue to go down that path, like, I think that's something that would be really fun. And I was working on brand strategy with a couple Web3 virtual artists, and so what's that?
Is it Angel Baby?
Yeah, so I worked with the Hume team on some of the early ideation around how that story would come together and how to market it. Yeah, it's been fun to see that experiment and the possibilities there, and some combination of like virtual persona with IP, and get the community involved, and then have collectibles and assets as part of it. And it's so interesting now. People can license their voices and likeness, and you can kind of like AI generate things. And so yeah, I think that's an area that I'd still love to pursue, which I actually studied music and, I'm a
Yeah.
trained musician. Yeah, it'd just be fun to connect that personal interest and kind of passion with a character that I get to build. For a long time, I was like telling people, I was like, I'm Maui Prime's publicist, right? I basically just market my ape. And so at one point, my ape was like the like Google thumbnail for like certain searches, or it's like has been copied all over like Instagram and TikTok for
I
memes
think
and
it's like one
stuff.
of the most recognizable ape.
I hope so.
Would it be its karaoke song?
Oh, Maui Prime's karaoke song. I guess it's like maybe Mr. Roboto or something. So like the backstory that I worked on with Jenkins, the ballet team, the
Mm.
writers room team for Maui Prime is that he was sent back in time from like an AI to destroy Ethereum, but he landed at the Bored Ape Yacht Club, and Jenkins, who's the valet there, like found this robot, was like, you don't need to destroy Ethereum, it's decentralized, and like you should just, and so he became a music producer, right? And so I think that I'm interested in kind of like EDM and like electronic kind of production. When Aloe and I were working on stuff, we actually had some ideas for like the mutant version of
Mm.
Maui Prime having like a different musical style.
Mm.
And so songs that would be like kind of mutated and remixed or grungier, coming from like the two mutant versions of my ape.
It's kind of like a independent digital identity that can be explored, kind of completely detached from your personal traits and everything, basically.
And maybe who we end up being in the metaverse can be a truer version of ourselves. And honestly, that's probably multiple characters, right? Because we're all kind of like multi-personality. Like we all have different ways that we act at different times, and could we find ways to visualize that and imagine that in a digital world? Like, I hope so.
There was a quote from someone we had on the podcast early at the very beginning of the season number one, I think. And he said, "You come to the metaverse for what you can do, but you stay for who you can be." And I resonate
Mm,
with that as well. If you can express different parts of your identity, or you're allowed to be, or whoever you need
yeah,
to be that day, then that makes you stick around.
It also might influence you then in real life. It's really interesting how
Yeah.
the relationships are going to be. It's actually, yeah, there is like a Bored Apes members that use their apes to create the content on social media, and because
yeah,
they started being a specific way, like trying to be like an example, and then talking with them in a private, they were saying how it influenced them in the real life, how it actually made them
interesting.
better in some different ways. So it's really interesting to explore this relationship between you and your digital identity, whether it's the truer version of yourself or the better version of yourself, and then how it's going to influence you back
Hmm.
in the physical world. And there is also personalities in the Web3 space that use their faces but kind of act differently, how they would love to be in the real world, and then potentially it also influence them how they are now and who they are now. Really interesting space.
Well, that was a great conversation, and thank you so much for taking the time. And yeah, do you have any questions for us?
No, yeah, just thanks for having me. It was really fun to chat. And then sure,
But yeah,
yeah.
really grateful for your time and for the conversation and your personal insights and the vision of the future. And
Whatever
probably
happens.
see you in the book club.
Ah, yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah, that'll be fun.
unfortunately not in New York, but hopefully to join it at least online.
Yeah, I think
FOMO.
they'll dial you in.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Cool.
All right, thank you both.
Also, I'm kind of fainting.
Oh no.
Yeah, like as I move my head, it feels like I'm